Oh, at every level. I think I'm really proud to be part of shaping our lives. I think, it's not just about talk, it's walking the walk. And the way that we have sought to work in an equal and inclusive way. And for example, when we made the decision to seek to have as directors people with learning difficulties, and did not want it to be about people sitting there making up the numbers completely out of their depth and having no idea what was going on, and we tried to think it through, and we thought it through with people that we already knew, and that they wanted to have support, and having ways of having support at meetings and beyond meetings, and listening to people, and people being truly equal. And I think we have made progress towards that in that context and other things too. You'll never get to a destination of what you want, but I think trying to work in ways which are inclusive and address people's different impairments, different support needs, different communication needs. I think on the basis of what we've done, I would confidently say to anybody who challenged the view, oh, that person could never get involved, or this person could prove it.
Mm.
Just prove it. You know, I know people who are completely non-verbal who can certainly find ways of expressing what they want to do. I've encountered people who have to lie down at meetings because they can't sit, and they basically are in a prone position. There may be practical problems about accessing them to those meetings, but of course people can find ways. But it's the search for the ways. It's that commitment. That's the first thing I'd absolutely say was critical, because I've seen reports produced supposedly by people with learning difficulties, and you think to yourself, most people who have not got learning difficulties could not write a report like that. How are you claiming that they wrote it? It's not
Mm.
true. You have written it, and you've then made it sort of sound like they wrote it. Where, on the other hand, we have been involved in the publication of a report by people with learning difficulties where you just know it rings so true, how they say what they've got to say. So that's one thing. The other thing I think we've done a load towards has been, by carrying it out, loads of research projects with support from good people like Alec O'Neill at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. We have undertaken an enormous amount of research, which we have done in a different way, in keeping with ideas of emancipatory disability research, survivor-led research, research which equalizes relationships, research which is committed to accessing the experiential knowledge of people as service users, disabled people, and building collective knowledge. And we've done loads of that, and I know that it's useful, and it builds the situation, so it's more and more difficult for people to say they can't do it, or they can't do it properly, or it's not got authority. And we've been on the side of the angels. That's something I strongly remember, that in the 1970s, when an early disabled people's organization tried to get conventional researchers to do research to highlight what they knew, which was that disabled people could live independently. That research project ended up saying that disabled people would be always dependent, and actually called disabled people social parasites. And this is absolutely correct. And those disabled people who set that initiative up obviously then realized, if they wanted research that would not be biased, not fail to understand, not be appreciative of the realities of disabled people, then disabled people would have to do it themselves. And I think we've been part of that and grown that tradition, and I think that's really important. I think also there's another thing. I've been involved via Shaping Our Lives and beyond Shaping Our Lives in a whole load of ministerial level groups, committees, activities. In one of them, we achieved massive success. That was again through the involvement of an important person who was supportive of the issues we embrace. And that was, it's I think, significantly to do with us, that service user involvement has, since the early 2000s, in social work qualification, been a requirement, still funded by central government. And user and care involvement is a massive changer in social work education, and it's been extended to other parallel health-related courses for education too. And that is really, really important. But the other thing I'd want to stress is that if you look realistically at how things have been, especially for the last 12 years, the amount of impact we can make on policymakers is very limited for obvious reasons. But then that should remind us that there are different ways of developing ideas and policy, and we have not therefore been hopeless and useless. I think the key way of changing things that really works, that changes mindsets, attitudes, is in ourselves. And I think it's incalculable that the amount of difference that organizations like Survivors Speak Out, Shaping Our Lives, disabled people's organizations have made in how people come to see themselves as disabled people, as service users. And that's the real basis for empowerment and change. Women, I can't speak for women, so forgive me for saying this, I don't think women would feel necessarily that they've made anything like the amount of progress they would like to have made in relation to the politics and gender. When you have something happening as happened now a year ago in relation to Sarah Everard, who was murdered by a serving policeman, and the failure, in my opinion, not only the awful things that have also been identified as a result of that, but the failure really to act on it doesn't commend one the idea of success in change. But women are not the same women that they were 20 years ago. And what happened after that murder, how women responded to it, and how the flame is still going now, and so on and so on. The Me Too movement, these movements are critically important. It's change within us that will build the big change. And I think it's not to be forgotten that we actually, although it's not reported like that in the mainstream media, we live it, and I've written about it in that book I wrote, trying to combine history and personal experience, All Our Welfare. At the same time as all the reactionary things have been going on, people, all sorts of people, not just people who are actively involved like me, have been rethinking how they come at the world. You know, when I was young, when I was young, if you were an unmarried mother, that was just appalling. And your child was called illegitimate. I mean, and that was awful for that child, you know. And they have that series on television about the midwife. I have never watched it. I couldn't sit and watch it because the reality was what was happening even in the early 60s, the middle 60s, was you would be encouraged for your child to be taken away from you. And if you were lucky, many years later, because of changes and improvements, you might then be able to find your child and possibly have a relationship with it. That was absolutely routine. All sorts of things have changed profoundly. That how life was racialized. I'm not suggesting it's a-okay, but it's fundamentally different. And it's fundamentally different in relation to personal relations, how most of us now relate to each other in our difference. In relation to sexuality, you know, I had Susie's uncle who died some years ago, who was over 80. He was a guy who, just a very ordinary bloke, who'd been a bus driver. And I just was amazed at his capacity to catch up. You know, here was a guy who understood and was appreciative of people's difference, and hadn't held on to some post-war attitude of, oh, they're awful, and we must keep them out. Where our politicians have an extraordinarily squalid ability to emphasize those things and to persuade us to be on your own in a modern world outside of a grouping which could actually offer you support, even at the level of if something goes terribly wrong internationally, as we've just been seeing, that's awful. You must keep away from Johnny Foreigner and not allow them here, and that's better than to try and grow the kinds of relationships that were encouraged by the Second World War, because the legacy of the Second World War was not division, as they suggested. It was about unification. So I think that people have grown up a lot, but it doesn't take much political manipulation and a minority of people who are prepared to believe that stuff, because of, I think, maybe we aren't sorting ourselves out. We're discouraged from sorting ourselves out, owning who we are, you know, blah, blah, blah. But I think shaping our lives is part of a much broader thing, which is about challenging the denial of realities, challenging oppression and discrimination, challenging people's exclusion, and recognizing the value of doing things together with all our talents in all our diversity. And that, I think, for me, is one of the next steps for shaping our lives. I hope, I'm not being greedy, you know, we've got to keep doing things we're doing. We're not here to accomplishing all that. But I think when we are able to work more with other different kinds of campaigns, to build that momentum and build that understanding, I think that will be terrific and very, very important.